Alexis Bowman was 41 years old, and for 9 years she had let almost everyone believe the modest tool belt around her waist was the full measure of what she could do. She drove a 15-year-old work van with her business name fading off the side panel. She wore faded coveralls to job sites and kept her hair pulled back plain. Neighbors called her the fix-it lady and asked her to look at a leaky faucet the same easy way they'd ask anyone with a van and a ladder. That Thursday evening, her husband's girlfriend, Deja, pulled into Alexis's driveway with 2 SUVs and 18 men she'd called in through her brother's crew, all of them spilling out onto the pavement in the low orange light. There, Deja announced through her rolled-down window to make sure Alexis understood exactly who she was dealing with and to make sure the house got signed over quietly, without a lawyer, without a fight, without any more inconvenience to anyone's Thursday evening. $340,000 in home equity was what Deja believed she was owed for the trouble of loving a married man for 6 months. What Deja never bothered to find out, not once in those 6 months, was what 3 unmarked years in Alexis's service record actually meant, or why the folded flag in the hallway closet wasn't there for decoration. She came to that driveway certain she'd brought enough men to end the conversation quickly. She had absolutely no idea how wrong she was, or how differently that evening was about to go for every single person standing in it. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. 3 weeks before that Thursday, the morning had started the way most of Alexis's mornings started. Early. Quiet. The house still holding on to the cool from the night before. She stood in the garage with a mug of coffee going lukewarm on the workbench, looking at the heavy bag hanging from the rafters, the one she'd hung herself the same week she came home for good and never quite got around to explaining to anyone why she needed it. Her father used to say, "Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast." Panic never once got anybody home early. Otis Bowman had been a Marine before he was a locksmith, dead 4 years by then, and his voice still surfaced in her most whenever the noise around her started picking up. She ran a hand along the frame of the bag and thought, the way she often did, that most people confused calm for weakness right up until the moment it cost them something. She had met Corey at a hardware supply auction, back when he was 31 and easy with a compliment, the kind of man who noticed a woman's forearms before he noticed anything else about her, and made that sound like a kind of respect. He'd outbid her on a set of clamps she actually needed, then found her afterward in the parking lot and handed them over anyway. Said he'd rather lose the auction than watch her drive off without what she came for. She'd thought, at the time, that this meant something about the kind of man he was. She asked what he did before the army, if she'd even been in the army. She told him a little, not much, the way she told most people. He said that was interesting, and then never asked again, which at the time she'd mistaken for politeness instead of what it actually was, which was disinterest with good manners on top of it. She married him 4 years later in a small ceremony at her father's church, Otis walking her down the aisle slower than he needed to, leaning in before he let her go to tell her that a man worth keeping was one who got curious about her, not just comfortable with her. She had believed, for a long time, that Corey was curious enough. She had been wrong about the timeline, not the standard. That morning, 3 weeks before the Thursday, everything came to a head. Corey kissed her cheek on his way out the door, smelling like a cologne she didn't remember buying him. His phone buzzed twice on the counter and lit up just long enough for her to catch the edge of a name before he snatched it up. Deja, with a small red heart beside it. She was watching. She had been watching for a while by then, in the same automatic way she used to watch a room for exits before she ever sat down in it. She didn't say anything that morning. She didn't say anything for the rest of that week either. She simply noted the name, the way her father had taught her to note anything that didn't sit right, and went on pouring the coffee like nothing about her morning had changed at all. That evening, the notification came through fully while his phone sat charging on the counter, and he was out back with the trash. A photo preview, blurred but unmistakable, from Daisha, along with 3 words underneath it that made the whole shape of the last several weeks click into place at once. 3 weeks passed the way weeks do when a person is choosing exactly when, not whether, to act. Then came the Thursday she'd already told you about. The SUVs, the 18 men, Daisha leaning out of her window like she was the one holding all the leverage in that driveway. What she hadn't said yet, what she barely let herself think in full sentences, was that some steady, unbothered part of her had already made most of her decisions 3 weeks earlier, quietly, the same night that notification lit up the kitchen counter. She had not confronted Corey the night she saw that photo. She had waited until he left for his shift the next morning, and then she picked up his phone, unlocked with the same 4-digit code he'd used since before they were married, and looked. Her hands didn't shake. 6 months of messages sat there in plain view, oldest to newest, the way she used to read a mission brief, looking not for the drama in it, but for the pattern underneath. Hotel stays in 2 different towns. A gym membership paid for someone who wasn't him. A message from 3 weeks earlier that read, "Once the house is in your name too, none of this matters anyway." He had no idea, snoring down the hall while she read that line twice, how completely he had just handed her everything she needed. Her face stayed perfectly calm reading it. She screenshotted every page anyway and forwarded them to an email address only she checked. Over the following days, without raising her voice to a single person, she built the rest of the picture. $22,000 moved out of their renovation business's account over 5 months, booked as materials for jobs that, when she checked the actual invoices, had cost 1/3 of that. She pulled every receipt against every job folder. The same way she used to inventory gear before a movement, nothing assumed. Everything counted twice. Money that had gone, instead, toward Daisha's rent, Daisha's car payment, and, apparently, toward keeping Daisha's older brother Trey and his security business on quiet retainer for reasons Corey had never once explained to her. You didn't need 3 deployments to recognize the shape of a man digging a hole and calling it a foundation. She found one more thing tucked in an old text thread Corey had forgotten to delete. A message from Trey himself, sent to Corey weeks earlier, promising that if the wife got difficult about the house, he had plenty of guys who could make sure she understood how things were going to go. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been quietly recruiting muscle to intimidate his own wife out of her own home. She thought about her father then, standing in his shop teaching her to read a lock before she ever learned to pick one. The mechanism first, always, before the shortcut. Some men, he used to say, only understand pressure. The trick is making sure you're the one who decides how much of it they actually get. She opened a folder on her laptop and named it simply Corey. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person who would help her handle this exactly the right way. 4 days later, she sat across from an attorney named Renata Sue in an office 2 blocks from the courthouse, a woman who had built a reputation on cases involving exactly this kind of quiet, calculated cruelty. Renata reviewed the folder without flinching once, the way a person reads something they've seen the shape of before, just never with a security crew attached to it. "You documented all of this yourself," Renata said, not quite a question. "It's what I know how to do," Alexis said. "Good," Renata said, because between the diverted funds and that message from her brother, we're not just looking at a divorce filing anymore. We're looking at a pattern that could get someone charged. Give me a week before we file. I want the timeline airtight before he even knows we've noticed. Renata's line landed simply. Paper trails don't panic. And neither should you. That weekend, Alexis drove out to see Silas Grady, her father's old friend from his own service days, a retired master chief who still lived 2 counties over and still, at 74, walked like a man who expected trouble to announce itself before it arrived. She told him everything on his back porch, start to finish, the way Otis had once taught her to brief a situation. No wasted words, no editorializing until the facts were all on the table. Silas was quiet for a long moment after she finished. "That crew Trey runs," he finally said. "I know a few names in it. Half of them are doing unlicensed repo work they've got no business doing. No bond, no insurance, nothing. One complaint filed right could shut the whole operation down overnight." "I'm not trying to shut it down," Alexis said. "I'm trying to make sure nobody shows up at my house thinking I'm an easy Thursday." "Then you already know what to do," Silas said. "Stay calm. Let them do something stupid in front of witnesses. Men like that always do, eventually. And if they don't wait for witnesses?" Alexis asked. "Then you already know how to handle that too," Silas said. "You just don't lead with it. Real strength," he told her before she left, "was rarely the loudest thing in the room. It just tended to be the last thing still standing in it." Back home, Alexis quietly reached out to a former teammate, a woman named Odalis who now worked private security consulting, and asked her to run a background check on Trey's operation. What came back confirmed everything Silas suspected, and then some. 2 prior assault complaints against members of the crew, both settled quietly out of court. And no state license anywhere on file for the security services Trey advertised on a barely maintained website that still listed a phone number disconnected 2 years earlier. There was more. Odalis found that one of Trey's regular contractors had a suspended license from a previous repossession gone wrong. The kind of detail that, paired with the message about making sure the wife understood, could turn a simple confrontation into a very serious legal problem for every man who showed up to take part in it. "They're not soldiers," Odalis told her over the phone. "They're guys who've never had anyone push back yet. That's a very different kind of dangerous. Predictable, though, if you let them think they're still in control right up until they're not." "That's the plan," Alexis said. That Sunday, Corey came home in decent spirits, humming under his breath while he changed for a job site visit that Alexis now understood perfectly well wasn't a job site visit at all. She asked him, evenly, how the Elm Street renovation was coming along. He told her, easily, that it was right on schedule, better than expected. Honestly, she was watching. She handed him his jacket and said nothing at all about the folders sitting on a secure drive with her attorney, or the calls she'd already made, or the quiet arrangements already sliding into place 3 miles away. By Wednesday, word had reached her, through Odalis, that Deja was telling people she planned to handle things directly before any papers got filed, and that Trey had agreed to bring enough men to make sure nobody had to raise their voice twice. Renata filed nothing yet. She wanted whatever Deja was planning to happen first, on record, in a way nobody could later claim had been provoked. Alexis spent that week the way she spent most weeks, steady and unremarkable to anyone watching. She went to job sites. She finished a cabinet installed 2 days ahead of schedule. She spent one evening in the garage, gloves on, working the heavy bags slow and deliberate, not because she needed the practice, but because her father had taught her that readiness wasn't something you built the night you needed it. Preparation, she thought, resetting her stance for another round, was just patience with its gloves already laced. The Thursday evening arrived exactly the way Odalis said it would. Alexis was home alone, porch light on, the heavy bag visible through the open garage door behind her, when the first SUV turned onto her street, followed by a second. doors opening before either vehicle had fully stopped. 18 men fanning out across her front yard and driveway, like they were reclaiming territory instead of trespassing on it. A neighbor 2 doors down stepped out onto her own porch at the noise, phone already in hand, recording, without being asked to. Deja stayed in her car at first, window down, chin lifted, clearly enjoying the size of the audience she'd assembled. "You're going to sign the house over," she said. "Tonight. No lawyers, no drama. My brother's guys are just here to make sure this conversation goes smooth." Alexis stood on her own porch, hands loose at her sides, and said nothing for a moment, the way she'd learned to let silence do work that words couldn't. "You brought 20 men to a house with 1 woman in it," Alexis finally said. "That tells me you've never actually had to think about what happens if it doesn't go the way you planned." One of the men, younger, clearly eager to prove something in front of the others, started up the porch steps toward her, hand reaching for her arm before he'd even finished deciding to do it. She moved once, economical, unhurried, redirecting his own momentum past her and down onto one knee on the porch boards, his wrist held at an angle that made the rest of the decision for him. She let go the instant he stopped resisting. He didn't get back up right away. The yard went very quiet. An older man near the back of the group, arms crossed, watching more carefully than the rest, said something low to the man beside him. Alexis caught only a few words of it. Something about Fallujah. Something about a name she hadn't heard out loud in years. "You're her," the older man said louder now, to no one in particular. "You're the one who pulled Callahan's whole squad out through that alley." Alexis didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. Trey stepped forward then, some of the confidence gone out of his posture, doing the same quiet math his sister hadn't bothered to do. "Nobody said anything about her being military," he said, mostly to Deja. "She's a handy woman," Deja snapped. "She fixes faucets. She just put Dre on the ground without breaking a sweat," Trey said. "I don't care what her business card says." Alexis let that settle before she spoke again. "Here's what's actually going to happen," she said. "Your brother's crew has 2 open assault complaints and 0 valid licenses between them, and I have a recording of tonight running since your first SUV turned onto this street. My attorney already has a message from your own phone promising exactly this. You can leave now, quietly. Or you can find out together how a judge feels about 20 men surrounding one woman's house over a property dispute." Deja opened her mouth to argue and found nothing behind it worth saying. Trey was already waving his men back toward the vehicles. "We're done here," he said. "This wasn't what you told me it was going to be. You had 6 months to ask a real question about the woman whose husband you were sleeping with," Alexis said to Deja. "Evenly. You chose to assume instead. That assumption is yours to carry now, not mine." She stood on her porch until the second SUV's taillights cleared the end of the street, and only then did she let her shoulders drop the half-inch she'd been holding them up the entire time. 8 months later, the garage held a new addition alongside the heavy bag, 3 more mats, a rack of pads, and a hand-lettered sign out front advertising a Tuesday evening self-defense class for women in the neighborhood, taught by Alexis herself, free of charge. First Tuesday of every month for anyone who couldn't pay. 12 women showed up the first night. 30 showed up by the 4th. Bowman Restoration had grown that year too, quietly, the way real things grow. 2 new commercial contracts and a small crew of her own. 3 of them veterans she'd hired off a referral list Silas still kept. Handwritten, same as always. She'd started keeping a second ledger, just for that crew, tracking hours the honest way, the way she wished someone had been tracking hers all along. She had started seeing someone that spring, unhurried, the way she did most things. Marcus Feld was a physical therapist who worked with veterans at the VA clinic downtown. Calm and steady. The kind of man who asked good questions and then actually listened for the whole answer. He didn't perform for her. He noticed things and mostly kept the noticing to himself, which she had learned, slowly, to trust. He'd shown up to her Tuesday class once, quietly, in the back, and stayed to help stack the mats afterward without being asked. Corey's business did not survive the year intact. 2 of his commercial clients pulled contracts once the diverted funds came to light in the divorce filing and word of the driveway standoff, impossible to keep fully quiet in a neighborhood that size, followed him into rooms he used to walk into with confidence. Trey's crew lost what little informal reputation it had once the license complaints went in. 2 of his regular contractors stopped taking his calls entirely, and the county opened its own inquiry into the unlicensed repossession work by fall. Deja moved 2 towns over by spring, working retail, telling anyone who asked a version of the story that left out the part where 20 men had gone home quieter than they arrived. Alexis heard about most of it the way a person hears weather from a place they no longer live in. She registered it. She did not linger on it. She had learned a long time ago that the people who go looking for a fight rarely need anyone else to finish it for them. They usually manage that part all on their own, given enough time and enough rope. That evening, out on the porch with Marcus, watching the last of the light fade behind the garage, she thought about her father's line, the one about panic never getting anybody home early. She was steady. She was solvent. She had never once, in the middle of any of it, needed to raise her voice to be heard. Some things, she thought, resetting the porch cushion Marcus had just settled into wrong, were worth building slow enough to hold. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.